All right. Welcome, everyone, to our From Work to Action webinar series. This is our second webinar since we launched the series at the end of last year, and we hold them on a quarterly basis. While we wait a few seconds for more people to join, let me just make a couple of remarks. This session is being recorded, so you can revisit it later on, review it. You will receive the link to your emails afterwards. And also you can see the Q&A box on the right-hand side. So yeah, just feel free to drop your questions, your comments, and we will address them at the end of the call. And for those who are not so familiar with JAS, let me just play a short video so you learn more about what we do.
We're big enough to create an impact and small enough to care. At JAS Worldwide, we create opportunities to thrive together. Whether shipping dangerous goods or giving back to our communities, we put passion and dedication into everything we do. We're one of the fastest growing family-owned logistics companies. With our innovative and sustainable approach, we handle all modes of transportation and other digital-driven supply chain solutions. We understand our customers' needs and always see things from their perspectives. From aerospace to automotive, from pharma and healthcare to luxury goods and apparel, from tech and electronics to energy solutions, our deep industry knowledge allows us to solve any challenge. Every challenge is an opportunity, and every opportunity is a step towards a better, greener future. We challenge the status quo to unlock new possibilities. Founded in Italy in 1978 by Biagio Bruni, we've grown to over 7,000 employees across 100 countries, with a global headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Even as we've grown, our founders' people-centric vision remains at the core of what we do. Experience how we harness our expansive reach to make a difference, always keeping our promise of personalized service and genuine care. JAS, where people make the difference. We're
Great. So now let me introduce myself. I am Alejandra Reyes. I am Global Sustainability Manager at JAS. And with us today is Mauricio La Sala. Thank you so much, Mauricio, for being with us. But I'll let you introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Mauricio La Sala, and I work with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights as the Chief of the Business and Human Rights section.
Great. Thank you, Mauricio. So now I would like, before we fully take off, I would like to give a brief overview of our sustainability strategy at JAS. We take a holistic approach. So we consider environmental, social, and governance topics. Now, when it comes to the environment, some milestones, let's say in our journey, are that we have science-based targets validated to become carbon net zero by 2050. We also have a CDP rating of B that demonstrates that we manage our environmental impacts. We also are a member of the Smart Freight Center, which is a working group to decarbonize logistics. And really, mainly our emissions come from our transportation and distribution activities. So a lot of our work goes with you as our customers, suppliers, to really reduce all the emissions coming from those activities through network optimization, sustainable biofuels, and so on. Also in our own operations, increasing the renewable share, renewable electricity share, and so on. Also, when it comes to the social aspect, like today's session, really about human rights due diligence, health and safety of our employees' career development, programs. Corporate volunteering is also a big part of what we do. And in the governance part, we have highlights like our EcoVadis Gold rating. We are also members of the United Nations Global Compact, have in place global policies, code of conduct, certified management systems, and we also assess the sustainability performance of our suppliers. So those are some of the highlights, so you have an idea, but we have a really strong strategy in place to be top of mind for sustainable logistics. Now, let me let's maybe pause for a moment, because when we talk about human rights, we tend to either talk about politics or the states, but we don't really see it as a topic that maybe concerned us as business directly. So I want to show you in this slide, like how a simple product like a smartphone reaches us, from mining raw materials to manufacturing to transport, warehousing to the final delivery. And behind all of these steps, there are people, right? Behind every shipment, every container, every delivery milestone, there are miners, factory workers, port workers, warehouse teams, delivery staff, even like us, let's say behind the screens, also doing all the admin work. So wherever there are people, there are potential risks, right? Like long working hours. We have working conditions, pressure maybe to meet targets, fatigue, discrimination, in even maybe the lack of a fair pay. So what it really illustrates is that human rights is not about abstract concepts, but it really shows up in every operational decision on how we select suppliers, how we identify all those issues and risks, and how we address them, most importantly. So really, the question is not about how we are connected to human rights, because we are. I think the real question is how we identified all those risks early and manage them responsibly. And with that in mind, I would like to now hand over to Mauricio, who will guide us through the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, and explain how they help companies to really move from awareness and word to action. So over to you, Mauricio.
Great. Thank you very much, Alejandra, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you all today. So yes, as Alejandra said, we're going to be talking a little bit about the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and you will see how is this connected to your work, hopefully by the end of the presentation. Let's move on to the next slide and the next one. So as Alejandra was saying, I think it is now well understood everywhere in the world that every single company has human rights impacts. So I think in that first slide Alejandra showed you with the environmental, social, and governance aspects, we are focusing in this presentation on the S, on the social part of it. So companies can obviously be a force for good. They make positive contributions to human rights every day. For example, by providing good employment and a source of income for many people, by contributing to the communities where they operate, by enabling many of the systems that our life relies on. That's all very good and well. Unfortunately, companies can also impact negatively on human rights. Some of the examples that you see here in these photos, for example, environmental pollution, when there is an oil spill, or when there is land grabbing or appropriation of water sources, for example, that leave many communities without water, without land, with a polluted environment, or when there is unsafe or dangerous working conditions, and people get injured or even die during the course of their work because of the health and safety issues, or perhaps individuals that are forced to work without a pay, or there is discrimination in payment or unequal treatment. All these things happen on a daily basis around the world where companies are also involved. Let's go to the next slide. But then you can see there is strong reasons why companies should respect human rights. First of all, it is the right thing to do. Obviously, human rights is something that belongs to every single human being on the planet, irrespective of who they are or where are they born or what's their gender or what's their race, to every single person. So it is the right thing to do. But in addition to that, there are business reasons or financial reasons also to respect human rights. First of all, not respecting human rights can lead to operational, legal, financial, and reputational risks. I could give you many examples of companies that have faced protests, boycotts, lawsuits, because they forgot to respect human rights in their operations, or they willfully didn't do so. Also, there is the flip side. There are negative risks, but there are also positive aspects of respecting human rights. There are many researchers and evidence that shows that the best companies when it comes to human rights can keep the best talent in their employees in their company. So employee retention and recruitment, attracting best talent, also the best graduates usually choose to work for the most ethical companies. And there is a lot of research that backs that up. There are more access to opportunities with governments, also procurement contracts with governments, for instance. Also investors that have ESG criteria for their investments usually choose to invest in companies that respect human rights and not in companies that have problems in that regard. It is an expectation now universally that companies respect human rights, and it also maximizes the contribution to society. So this is only some of the financial and business reasons to respect human rights that companies have, as we call them, the positive incentive to respect human rights, as well as the potential risks if companies do not do so. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, now I'm gonna want to explain to you a little bit about what are the guiding principles on business and human rights. So yeah, here we are. I'm gonna go through these slides quite quickly, but just to give you an idea of what are we doing in the United Nations when it comes to business and human rights. First, it was, first there was nothing at the beginning of 2000s, and then the UN appointed Professor John Ruggie as the special rapporteur on business and human rights, and he undertook a very long process of consultations with companies, with states, with civil society, with many people, and that whole process of many consultations and research culminated in the presentation to the Human Rights Council of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights in 2011. So this year we are celebrating the 15th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principles. Let's move to the next slide. So at the end of this 6-year period, the Human Rights Council adopted unanimously the guiding principles, and that by itself is very significant because that rarely happens. The UN Human Rights Council is a very divided council. There are 47 countries from all around the world, and as you can imagine, they hardly agree on anything. However, on this occasion in 2011, they all agreed to endorse the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and that gave a very strong normative weight that has continued to influence companies, governments, and multilateral institutions until this day. Let's go to the next slide. So the UN Guiding Principles, they are a very short document, and I invite you all to read it if you are interested. But basically, they apply to all states and they apply to all companies, right? They do not create new legal obligations, but they build on the existing international human rights law and international humanitarian law. They are made of 3 pillars. The first is the state pillar to protect. The second one is the corporate responsibility to respect. And the third pillar is the remedy pillar. And I'm going to go a little bit more in detail into each of these in the next slide. Yeah, so here you see the 3 pillars. The first one is built on what is called hardcore international law. So all the states are duty bearers. They are the subjects of international law, and therefore they have to respect the conventions and the treaties that they have signed to. Corporations, on the other hand, they are not direct subjects of international law, but there is still a responsibility for them to respect human rights. And then access to remedy applies to both states and to companies. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so the first pillar, very quickly, this mentions in the guiding principles that every state must protect against human rights abuses by third parties in their jurisdiction. So even if you're a state and there are abuses that are happening in your country, even if those abuses are not being committed by the state itself, but by other actors, whether it's companies or armed groups or other third parties, individuals, the state is responsible to prevent, investigate, punish, and redress about those abuses. There are clear expectations, and there is a call in the guiding principles for a smart mix of regulations. There should be voluntary and mandatory regulations to govern the social impacts of companies. Let's move to the second pillar. This is the corporate responsibility to respect. And this is perhaps the most relevant to JAS as a company and to every other company. The guiding principles contain a number of innovative mechanisms. One of them is human rights due diligence. That concept didn't exist before the guiding principles. It's something that the guiding principles brought to the international sphere, and now is very wide practice by a lot of companies, small, medium, large companies around the world, on how they do address the adverse human rights impacts that they are involved in. Basically, they say, you as a company, you should avoid causing or contributing to human rights impacts, and also seek to prevent and mitigate those impacts that you are directly linked to by your business relationships. So even if you are not directly involved in the adverse human rights impacts, but your business partners are, you as a company are called to prevent and mitigate those human rights impacts. So let's move to the next slide. There are three main things that companies should do to meet the responsibility to respect human rights. The first is to have policy commitments. So a human rights policy or a sustainability policy or a code of conduct that all employees and also external partners and investors, etc., can go and look and see what has the company committed to in terms of the policy commitment. For instance, JAS, as a signatory of the UN Global Compact, would have committed to have a human rights policy, for instance. And whether it's in the making or is already there is something that stakeholders can consult and see what are their policy commitments. The second aspect is human rights due diligence. As I mentioned before, companies are used to think about due diligence when it's about their legal reputation and their own due diligence for their own reputation. But this is not about the risks on the company. This is about the risks on people that are impacted by the company. That's what we mean when we say human rights due diligence process. And it is a process to identify, prevent, and mitigate for adverse human rights impacts that the company may be involved with. And then lastly is about remediation. When things go wrong, and unfortunately things do go wrong many times, all the time, there is a process by which companies should provide for a redress and remediation. Let's go to the next slide. Here, a little bit more in depth on what is the human rights due diligence process. Whether the company is causing, contributing, or is directly linked to the adverse human rights impact will determine how strong or how in-depth should your human rights due diligence process be. Also, it depends on where you are operating. If you operate in a conflict area, you are supposed to do an enhanced human rights due diligence process because the risks are more severe. If you operate in a stable, let's say, for example, a Nordic country in Western Europe, the risks are much lower, so your due diligence can be lighter. So it really depends on the size of the company, on the type of adverse human rights impacts, on the context where you're operating, and that will determine the complexity of these 4 steps: identifying the impacts, taking action, track your response, and communicate what you are doing. Let's go to the next slide. And then we come to the remedy. As I said, at the end of the day, things do go wrong all the time, and therefore we need to address how accountability and remedy are taken care of. So the first responsibility is for the state. The state should have the right judicial and administrative and legislative mechanisms by which victims of potential human rights abuses can go to and seek redress. But there is also non-judicial mechanisms. So those are the judicial mechanisms, the traditional courts. Non-judicial mechanisms can be a complaint mechanism, a labor tribunal, a national human rights institution, or the national contact point of the OECD guidelines, etc. And then there are also non-state-based grievance mechanisms. So every company should have an operational level grievance mechanism where anyone can submit a grievance, an employee or an external party whose human rights have been abused. They can submit a complaint through the company's operational level grievance mechanism. And the guiding principles contain a menu of criteria that these mechanisms should meet in order to be an effective grievance mechanism. So it has like, if you want, like a guide on how these mechanisms should actually be set up in practice that many companies follow because they find it very practical and very useful guidance. Let's go to the next slide. Here is where I go a little bit more in depth on what is the operational level grievance mechanism. Let me tell you maybe very briefly what is that criteria that I was talking about. The criteria of a good non-judicial grievance mechanism is that it should be legitimate, it should be accessible, predictable, equitable, transparent, rights compatible, and a source of continuous learning. This is, it goes a little bit into technical matters, but just for you to have an idea that the guiding principles also deal with the effectiveness criteria of a non-judicial grievance mechanism. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and here we see the trends. I mentioned in the beginning that the UN Guiding Principles in the 15 years since they were endorsed by the Human Rights Council have become very widespread and the golden standard for responsible business conduct in the world. Here you can see just a small sample of organizations, companies, and countries that have formally adopted the UN Guiding Principles in their own policies and operations. You know, organizations like the ILO, UNICEF, UNCTAD, Global Compact, countries like Australia, France, the EU, and companies like BBVA, Shell, Facebook, Meta, and others, they have all adopted the guiding principles in their operations, and they have committed to respect the guiding principles and conduct their businesses in alignment with the guiding principles. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, here we just see that this influence of the guiding principles is spreading. Not only has been voluntarily adopted by the companies that I just mentioned before. For example, there is a calculation that 80 of the 100 companies in the Fortune 100 have done some sort of commitment with the guiding principles. So 80%, that shows you how widespread it is. But also the regulatory landscape is evolving. You have more and more countries that are adopting mandatory human rights due diligence. That means that they are translating the guiding principles into hard law in their jurisdictions. So companies have no choice but to abide by them. There is transparency is now expected by an increasing number of stakeholders, not least by consumers of all these, of the products of all these companies. Also, it connects human rights to climate change, and that's another advantage of the guiding principle that makes the connection with all the responsibilities that companies have. And finally, there is this trend of technology and artificial intelligence now that also comes to play an important role in this field. And we have produced as the office guidance on how the guiding principles apply to AI companies, technology companies, social media companies. All that is available on our website. Next slide, please. Yes, and then just a few last slides to conclude and finalize my presentation, just to show you what we do here from the Office of the High Commissioner. The current High Commissioner is Volker Turk, and and for him, the issue of business and human rights is one of the priority issues. We develop a lot of guidance, training, and capacity building related to the dissemination and implementation of the guiding principles. We have projects at the regional level and also at the international level and at the local level in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, where we have offices around the world, and we develop these projects there. Next slide. Here you can see a very quick organigram of our section where we have, a corporate accountability and investigations team. We have a help desk team that is a free service for anyone to contact us, that we can offer advice on the guiding principles on business and human rights. We have a tech project, as I mentioned before. We have a project in Africa. We have the Accountability and Remedy project that has produced guidance on how to translate the third pillar of the guiding principles to practice. And when we have a Latin America and Caribbean project. These two regional projects, the Africa and the Latin America one, are funded by the EU. Next slide. And then, not to forget that there is a separate team. It's called the Working Group on Business and Human Rights. It's a group of 5 experts that are appointed by the Human Rights Council, and they conduct state country visits. They also produce some reports, and they organize the UN Annual Forum on Business and Human Rights, which is the largest annual gathering in the world. We had here 4,600 participants last November in Geneva. Alejandra was one of them, and it is a great place to come in and really exchange and views and learn from experts in the field about business and human rights. Next slide. That's it from me. So I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you may have or any comments that you may have about my presentation. And thanks again to Jazz for inviting us today to talk to you. Over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mauricio, for sharing all your insights and helping us better understand how human rights translate into, let's say, into business. And I think it was only like a sneak peek and overall, like big categories, so to say. But I would encourage everyone here from other companies to look into the guiding principles, as you mentioned, and also you as an employee be aware of what's also in place for your company. And to your comment, Mauricio, we are also committed to the guiding principles. We also have supplier code of conduct, grievance mechanisms, and so on. But it's important that you are aware of what's in place and of course, talk about it and ensure you follow it as well. I don't see questions for now, but maybe a quick one, Mauricio. Just what, let's say, advice would you give if you would have, I don't know, one suggestion how to start, maybe for one company that doesn't have this in place? What would be that first step?
Yeah, so I think the first step would be to look at your operations, at your entire supply chain, but also the operations in-house, and try to find out where are your most severe risks in terms of human rights. So that is the first step. You do a mapping of your operations and try to identify what are the highest risk for my company there. And then that's where you should focus your resources, your attention. Every company has limited resources to do this, but that's where you should start. And that is what the guiding principles is asking you to do, to focus first on the most severe risks, the highest risks, and then progressively move on to the next level of risks. And in that way, you can maximize your resources.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, thank you again, Mauricio. And I think we've come to an end. But yeah, the main intention of today's webinar was really to raise awareness and collaboration across our operations. So I hope this helped you. Maybe we learned something new together and yeah, start moving from word to action, awareness to action. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for taking the time. If you have questions, you know who to reach out to, and yeah, happy to continue our collaboration and see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.